So how do we determine what's a good battery?
well, that's a good.
Uh,
That's the question we're talking about because I'm using a very rough metric of I'm going to just hit it as hard because the reason I focused on the 60 amps is that you see the batteries with the C rating and they say it's whatever 80 C continuous rating, and I'm like, well, let's just see how close to true that is. And so I hit it with, this is only around 45 C, which is not very much,
yeah.
and it sags in 3 seconds, and I'm like, well, is that continuous? What do you call continuous?
So I'll tell you how they do how responsible battery manufacturers do ratings. So if you've got a battery, I'll use easy numbers so that I don't have to do a bunch of weird math.
Sure.
1,000 milliamp hour or 1 amp hour battery,
Hmm.
and it says it's 10 C.
Hmm.
That's what the safe discharge is. So a
Right.
C rating is generally they hit the battery as hard as they can
Right.
for a certain amount of time, and it's different. There's some industry standards in certain industries, but not for ours. Um, and they hit it for a certain amount of time at that rating
Uh-huh.
and at that current. And if the battery doesn't go to a certain heat, a certain temperature, a certain
Right.
heat, uh, if it doesn't hit a certain temperature, explode or sag below a certain voltage level,
Right.
they call that the C rating.
But
Now,
here,
burst ratings don't exist.
and here's what's yeah, burst rating is complete BS. But here's what's interesting about that procedure. If we assume that these manufacturers are not just making, and by the way, I'm 100% sure that some of these manufacturers in the RC world are just making up their C ratings, right? They're just
But the manufacturers aren't. The relabelers are.
right. That's right. Not the manufacturers of the cells. Maybe the people putting the packs together, or some of these guys I think are just buying pre-made packs
Yeah,
and
every time
slapping a
someone
sticker
touches
on
it,
them.
it gets 10% more.
Right, and they see that their competition is advertising 60C, so they just say 70C regardless. But the legit way of measuring C rating is, as you said, to discharge it at a given rating and check to see if it gets too hot, if the voltage sags below a certain point, or of course if it explodes. But here's the thing. The sag, I think, is especially interesting because I'll bet you that they're using the safe voltage, like maybe 3.0 or 3.2 volts per cell, whereas we
Most
know
likely 3.2.
3.2, fine. So we know that when you're flying a copter, if you're sagging to 3.2 volts per cell, you do not have enough power to do the kind of things that we're asking them to do. If you're at
Yes.
the end of a battery and you do a big punch and the battery sags and now you fall and you try and catch yourself at the end, that's a recipe for going into the ground because you just didn't have as much power as you thought you did. And
Yes.
that's one reason I think why maybe these C ratings are bullshit. Even if the manufacturer or the relabeler or whoever is giving an honest procedure, if they're using 3.2 volts as the sag point, they should be using a much higher one. And of course, that means you end up with a rating like you much lower C rating.
So here's the
That doesn't look
problem.
good.
When you punch it in a quad, if you and I'm gonna make some generalizations because obviously there's a million setups. Let's say
Right,
you're
right.
you're flying at a competitive level or a semi pro whatever,
Hmm.
or you've just got a nice powerful rig. You're pulling anywhere between 60 and 120 amps out of some of these 280 to 250 sized
Yeah,
devices.
at peak, at full throttle.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
here's
that's
the thing: is
yeah. Go ahead.
that's bad. Like
Yeah, yeah.
like that the battery does not like it. Your C rating is where you can discharge before it does damage. You go 20% over that C rating, you may be damaging your battery. It doesn't mean you are. I'm
Right,
not going to again. I can't say that. But
right.
if you pull 100 amps out of a battery that starts to sag at 60 or 40,
Hmm.
you've punched it. You've put
Sure.
400 psi through a drinking straw.
Right,
Um,
right,
it's something's gonna
right.
give.
So what kind of tests could we do? Like if you think about different kinds of pilots. So let's say that there's one kind of pilot who maybe he's a drag racer. And actually I have started to see a couple events advertising
Yeah.
quadcopter drag racing. These guys are going to go all out in a straight line, or maybe you're doing top speed tests. You're trying to break 120 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. And so you're going to basically go full throttle as fast and as hard as you can. Hello, cat. Um, compared to, let's say, a an acro pilot who may have 3 second punches followed by zero throttle while he goes up and over a tree and falls, and he
Yeah.
may need a battery with strong punches but better recovery. And then
Yeah.
just we could say there's a third kind of pilot who maybe is doing low discharge and going for maybe endurance flights, the kind of guy flying maybe
Oh,
an aerial photography platform. How can those
there's so many
guys
balances.
find the right kind of battery for them?
Uh, man. Okay, so that's just difficult, and there's so many gradients in there as well because, like you said, acro with those 3 second punches and a lot of floaty. I
Yeah.
see a lot of people who do very smooth, like constant motion
Hmm.
that are flying, or like racers that aren't dragging, but they're
Right.
they're 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 always somewhere between like 40 and 70% stick. They
Right.
never punch really. They never
Right.
go lower.
Exactly.
They need a battery that is consistent. Punchers need something that recovers well.
Right.
Drag just needs to pick a different sport. No,
they they need.
they're just gonna blow batteries up. They need to
Oh yeah,
understand that
no.
they've
Well,
got
I
use.
think I think the idea for mini quads at least that anybody's going to have a healthy relationship with their battery. I think we just give up on that and we assume it's kind of like Top Fuel. The Top Fuel dragster. People say that's bad for your battery, and I say the Top Fuel dragsters rebuild their engine after every like 3 runs,
Yeah,
right? So we're not going to have long healthy lives of our batteries, but we do want to get good. We don't obviously if we get 10 cycles out of it, then nobody could afford to fly, and it's yeah.
yeah. And if you're doing like okay, so in the drag example, you should assume you should do. Oh, and I'm not going to use the term, but you should do one use cycle with your battery, and then that battery gets charged up and gets used for your drag.
Hmm.
And
And that's
I would call that battery done. Like in
even
most
after
situations,
one. If you take and you do a sustained, let's say you do 120 amp out of a, let's be generous and say it's an 1800. You say you pull 120 amps out of an 1800, and you just suck it all the way down to empty, and then you land.
oh yeah, if you actually fully discharge the battery, if you hit it that much, not fully discharge, but if you
Sure.
safely discharge the battery, and you're not just you do like 1 or 2 runs, like 1 or 2 races,
Yeah.
and because the drag's going to be short, you're not going to use that much of your capacity.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, I would if you actually run that battery down to I need to change batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, if you're doing drag and you want to win,
Right.
you're not going to use that battery
Yeah.
again
Exactly.
in the
Exactly.
second race. You're going to put a fresh cell
No.
in
Well,
there
clearly,
because.
clearly, clearly. Yeah.
But yeah, I would not if you overtax a battery that much. You charge it back up, but
Sure.
pay attention to what voltage it hits.
Right.
And pay attention to how quickly it self discharges. Self discharge, you should see about 5% a month of
If
a
you see
lithium
more
battery.
than 5% a month, well, nobody in this hobby that I know of is letting their batteries sit for a month. But if you were to see more than 5% a month, then that would be a sign the battery was not happy.
Yeah, when a battery
Yeah.
gets really upset, you're going to see a lot more than 5% a month
I
self
always
discharge.
use what I always do is I always fly based on current consumed or charge consumed. Use milliamp hours as my primary metric for when to land. Although if I see that the battery is sagging, then I obviously land. And I look at the resting voltage after I draw. So I typically use 80% of the rated capacity. And like I said, when the batteries are new, they're recovering to close to 15.2, and as they get older, the recovery gets lower and lower and lower for the same milliamp hours. And eventually I hit the point where I'll be at like 800 milliamp hours out of a 1300, and I'm sagging to 13.5, and I'm like, well, this battery is basically done. If it can't stay over 14 for 80% of the rated capacity, then I think the battery is close to done.
Right, and I've seen some of your videos, as far as like where you're actually just playing around, not
Hmm.
uh,
Not
doing it
testing. Yeah.
instructionally, and you have an aggressive style. Like you're punching the battery a lot, and when I say aggressive, I mean you might get full stick on your throttle.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely.
I when I fly, I rarely get full throttle, but
Right.
lately everything that all the frames I've been flying have got way more power than I need.
Yeah.
So it's not been a necessary thing. But yeah, you're punching the battery. The thing that makes everything we're talking about kind of a non-point is the fact that, and I don't know, some battery manufacturers can get all pissed off at me. Making lithium polymer cells is easy compared to making lithium ion cylinder cells. The factory required, the equipment is just the bar is much lower.